The United States of America is preparing for open war with China and Russia. The Pentagon is allocating tens of billions for rearmament and the purchase of missiles, rewriting its nuclear doctrine and launching a multi-billion-dollar program to build nuclear submarines. Today, August 5th, several decisions by the US military establishment became public, which together create a picture of preparations for a much larger confrontation than the current local conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. The Pentagon is developing a new classified nuclear strategy specifically in case of a regional conflict with China or Russia. At the same time, the US Navy has allocated nearly $80 billion to expand the production of nuclear submarines. Meanwhile, in Europe, there is a public call to prepare their own defense plan, independent of American support, in case of a direct war with Russia. Because, as the author of this call claims, a kinetic war by Moscow against Europe may happen in the coming years or even months. A lot of details have emerged here about how America is truly shifting to an entirely new military footing and is clearly preparing for something bigger. In this episode, we will analyze each of these three decisions separately and what unites them. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's go through all these topics together. But before we begin, please check right now if you are subscribed to this YouTube channel because you might be watching but still haven't subscribed yet. Click the subscribe button. We're moving towards the 300,000 subscribers mark, so I would appreciate all your support. Subscribe. So, let's start with the new nuclear strategy of the United States of America, because this is the most substantial and the most alarming part of today's episode. The development is led by the head of the Pentagon's policy office, Elbridge Colby, as he says, as part of a regular review of nuclear policy, which, by tradition, is carried out with each new administration of the US president. But the content of the current review goes far beyond, the usual routine process. No, there will be major changes here. According to NBC News sources, the document questions the approach to the use of nuclear weapons, which has remained virtually unchanged for decades. A key element of the new strategy under Donald Trump is increased attention to the possible use of short-range tactical nuclear weapons, specifically during a regional conflict with China or Russia. That is, we are not talking about a global exchange of strategic strikes based on the principle of mutually assured destruction as it was understood throughout the Cold War, but about a scenario of limited regional use of lower-yield nuclear weapons. And by the way, in Washington, they don't even hide the fact that they have decided to reconsider their approaches. Right after Russia deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus and threatened to use them against Ukraine. And now in Washington at the Pentagon they say, listen, we need to reconsider our strategy so that we can use tactical nuclear weapons in any conflict at all. Although, according to NBC News, the proposals have already drawn criticism from some US lawmakers and military officials who fear a sharp lowering of the threshold for using nuclear weapons. The logic behind this criticism is clear. If short-range tactical nuclear weapons are seen as a realistic, applicable tool in a regional conflict rather than as an extreme last resort measure, then the psychological and strategic barrier to its use is lowered. And this is exactly what critics of the documents and the American system itself are afraid of. In fact, they fear that a tactical nuclear missile will be equated with a conventional cruise or ballistic missile. In other words, launching a cruise or ballistic missile will become the same as using a tactical nuclear missile. But why is this happening right now? This is also interesting. The thing is, in February of this year, the New START treaty between Russia and the US expired, the very agreement that for decades had limited the number of strategic nuclear weapons on both sides. The treaty was not extended, but at the same time, Washington repeatedly stated that any new similar agreement should also include China. In other words, the previous bilateral logic of arms limitation, from the US perspective, no longer reflects reality, in which the nuclear potential is simultaneously being built up by both Moscow and Beijing. They say, well, you can't just make another restraining agreement between Moscow and Washington while Beijing remains outside the deal. Earlier, in the spring of this year, the assistant to the head of the Pentagon, Robert Kadlik, directly spoke about the crisis caused by the need to simultaneously deter two nuclear powers at once. It is precisely this crisis of dual deterrence that is the main reason for preparing a document aimed at two potential fronts at once, rather than just one as it was before. Alongside the revision of the nuclear strategy, there has also emerged a concrete, quite tangible material solution in terms of money, something you can actually see and touch right now. The United States Navy has allocated just over $76.5 billion to expand the production of two types of submarines at once. Virginia-class attack submarines and Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines. The official wording of the department is as follows: additional funding is aimed at strengthening U.S. nuclear deterrence and supporting American industry. And now, pay attention to the choice of these two specific types of submarines, because it is not accidental and is directly linked to the revised nuclear strategy. And Virginia are attack submarines designed for precision strikes, reconnaissance, and conventional non-nuclear combat missions. But Columbia is the strategic component of the nuclear triad. Submarine carriers of intercontinental ballistic missiles whose sole function is deterrence through the constant hidden threat of a retaliatory nuclear strike. And so, funding both classes at the same time means that the Pentagon is simultaneously increasing both conventional strike capabilities and the strategic nuclear component, which logically fits with the new nuclear doctrine, which considers both a conventional regional conflict and the potential tactical use of nuclear weapons as realistic, not hypothetical, scenarios. Now, the European angle is absolutely part of this same story, and Europe is acting independently here, and everything already indicates that from now on Europe will have to move forward on its own. Even today, The Guardian puts this view of European security quite bluntly, quote, Russia's imperial ambitions begin with Ukraine, but they don't end there. Russia's provocations and hybrid interference in European politics indicate that Moscow could launch a kinetic war, that is, a full-scale war against Europe in the coming years or even months. It is against this backdrop that European countries, especially those closest to Russia's borders, are increasing their defense budgets. And separately, The Guardian analyzes a slogan that is now popular in European politics, which goes like this: a stronger Europe in a stronger NATO. And The Guardian says this slogan is misleading, it's all nonsense. The logic is this: yes, Europeans are indeed increasing their own military power. But the alliance itself as a whole is weakening without the full participation of the United States of America. So, in other words, the mere numerical strengthening of individual European armies does not automatically compensate for the level of protection that for decades was provided specifically by the American military presence and American resources as the foundation of collective defense. And here is a direct logical connection with everything we discussed a little earlier in this episode. The point of The Guardian's appeal is that Europe should not just increase, yes, the supply of its own weapons, allocate more money for weapons, and that's it. No. Europe should develop its own independent defense plan in case of war with Russia, instead of relying on automatic American protection. This is exactly the same logic that is confirmed by this revised nuclear strategy of the Pentagon. If the American military and nuclear strategy is now officially being prepared for two potential fronts at once, China and Russia, and its own stockpiles of conventional weapons are already depleted by the parallel war with Iran. So much so that Washington, as you know, is even forced to refuse Ukraine the supply of ready-to-use interceptor missiles for the Patriot system. Then European capitals have every reason to doubt that in the event of a direct confrontation with the Russians, American support will be swift, complete and sufficient exactly when it is needed. So let's put all these three factors together into one unified picture. The Pentagon is preparing a secret nuclear doctrine aimed simultaneously at China and Russia, with a clear shift in focus. Structure, miles per hour, but this shift is already causing concern among some American lawmakers and military personnel within the American system itself. At the same time, the US Navy is investing nearly $77 billion specifically in those classes of submarines that provide both conventional strike presence and strategic nuclear deterrence at the same time. Meanwhile, in Europe, against this backdrop, there is a clear warning. The Guardian has issued a warning about the possibility of a direct war with Russia, not in years, but in a matter of months, accompanied by a call to build their own defense strategy, completely independent from the US. As you can understand, these seem like three separate events, but no. This is a coordinated picture of how the major military powers are simultaneously preparing for a scenario that until recently was difficult to even imagine, but now it's obvious that all of this is being worked out at the level of entire doctrines, entire defense strategies, and now it's obvious. Let's go over it once again. The Americans are building a new nuclear strategy where the use of tactical nuclear weapons could become something commonplace. And they are investing tens of billions of dollars specifically in those submarines that will be able to conduct both conventional and nuclear warfare. And Europe is starting to wake up and they're saying, listen, we need to come up with our own strategy to deter the wild Russians. So, I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support an independent YouTube channel, I would appreciate your... You can do this financially by donating through the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.